Republican State Representative Todd Smola has held the first Hampden District seat for 13 years. You'll hear from his Democratic challenger, Tanya Neslusan, later in the program. Smola spoke with me about a number of items that he sees as priorities for the district, as well as the quiet nature of his race so far.
Maybe it's because there's so much else that's going on, particularly on the national stage. I think people have been kind of enveloped in a lot of issues of the day that they're seeing on the nightly news on the national scene. So local races tend to be more quieter when it comes to competing with those types of things going on.
For you, 13 years now representing the 1st Hampden District, what do you see as 2018 priorities for you?
There's a couple of big things. First and foremost, I think transportation infrastructure is hugely important in the Commonwealth. I think that we have bridges and roads that are structurally deficient, and we need to come up with a plan in order to fix those. It's something that we've been hearing from east to west in Massachusetts. So I think the legislature really needs to come together with the administration and try and figure out what we're going to do about that. Secondly, the opioid crisis, something that we've been dealing with for a number of years. It continues to be a problem. Fortunately, we're making strides in that direction, and we've done some good things in the budget this year in terms of allocating more resources, getting more beds for treatment, and that's really the key, I think, is those treatment beds and facilities that are able to accommodate people. And then the third thing, I think, is aid for education, our Chapter 70 Review Commission that came together to make recommendations to change our education formula. We were hoping to get there at the end of this session. We didn't quite get there.
Close.
Very, very close. Didn't quite get there, and sometimes when you're dealing with a big issue like that, it's difficult to reach out and find ways to find compromise at the end of the day. But I think we can get there in the new term, and I think that'll be a focus as well.
Let's work backward on that list. So looking at the education, the funding formula, the transportation reimbursement always is sort of a perennial issue here in Western Massachusetts, and it was a big part of what could have been passed this time around. Do you think that the eastern part of the state, representatives and senators, just don't get it? Why is that? It seems to be a sticking point again and again.
You know, the dynamic of geography in Western Massachusetts is so very different than folks of eastern Massachusetts that have multiple transportation options to be able to get from point A to point B. When you mix that into the formula of education, it's even a broader problem. And so that transportation formula really is part and parcel to what we're doing overall with education, because it's such a big part of the local municipal budgets. So that really has to be a centerpiece as well.
Opioid crisis, you mentioned those treatment beds, but a big thing now has been coming up around whether or not Narcan, where it should be distributed, who should have access to it. Obviously, our first responders are carrying it now in many places, but now there's been discussion that maybe it should be more publicly available in very certain, strategic areas. What do you think about that, access to Narcan by members of the public?
I think that's something to explore. Obviously, the safety ramifications that go with using Narcan are going to be extremely important. We have seen over the course of recent years what Narcan coming onto the scene has done with addiction and overdose. We've seen that it has a positive impact, and we have to remember that when people are in the throes of this addiction, the important thing for us as a society is to try and get them into treatment. It doesn't help to revive them with Narcan and then push them out the door and say, thank you very much, see you later. So Narcan is a wonderful thing to have as an option to bring people back who are at the very ends of this addiction, but at the same time, we have to have an aftercare plan once that's done.
If you talk to first responders, a lot of them will say, this isn't the end of their addiction. I've revived this person 2-3 times in the same month. They're still struggling. That's not, in their opinion, what they've said to me is they're not helping, you're only prolonging the problem.
I've talked to some of those people that have actually been Narcan several times and have come back, a couple that were fortunate enough to get into an addiction program. But you're absolutely right about that. Every case is different. Every circumstance is different. I think what we have to recognize is the fact that this is such a broad problem across Massachusetts. It's a broad problem across the country. So while Narcan is nice to have as an option, certainly it's not a cure-all. And so we've got to do better in addition to that.
And just quickly on the roads and bridges piece, since we started with that, Berkshire Eagle did a report not so long ago, I believe it was sometime this summer, looking at those deficient roads and bridges. And Western Massachusetts has a large number of those bridges that are either structurally deficient or right on the edge there. Do you think that there will be the political will to push the dollars out here to remediate, to fix those problems?
I think we don't have a choice. Political will or not. It has become such a problem, and it's growing exponentially as time goes on. And I think what it comes down to is small cities and towns like the communities that I represent, they simply don't have the resources in order to make these repairs, in order to keep the infrastructure in good, safe public standing.
But when you've got big ticket items like East-West Rail pushing for that study to go beyond the study, do you think that roads and bridges will be sexy enough for people to buy into?
Got to find a way to get there. I mean, at the end of the day, roads and bridges are the primary source of transportation infrastructure in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so we can't ignore that. You can do these things in tandem, and you have to come up with a plan in order to do it. I think if we can get all the heads in the room together and come up with a plan, I think that'll be doable.
You do have a Democratic challenger, Tanya Neslusan. She's also been on the show. And one of the things that she said that she hears from people in the district is they're hungry for change. You've been in the legislature 13 years now. How do you meet people where they're at?
You know, it depends on what the meaning of change is. I mean, I don't get the same sense that people are necessarily looking for change in the way that my opponent may be implying. I think people are looking for change primarily. What I'm hearing from people in the district, and I've been connected to it for 25 years, you know, as an elected official and as a volunteer, is I think people's frustration is primarily coming out of what's going on in Washington, D.C. And it's not the bar with what we do here in the Massachusetts legislature. I think we're much more collegial. We work much more on a bipartisan level in Massachusetts. And all you have to do is look at the record of accomplishments that we've had in Massachusetts. You know, we're #1 in education, and we've held that title for a number of different years. We lead in we are atop in the nation in terms of our unemployment rate, which is great. We have $1 billion surplus in Massachusetts, which means we're managing our money well. I'm one of the members of the Ways and Means Committee that negotiates the budget. So we're doing positive things in Massachusetts. When people say they want change, I think that it depends upon what kind of change that they're looking for. And I think the change people are looking for is more or less what they're seeing on the national level.
And I hear what you're saying about the national level, but a recent Suffolk University Boston Globe poll said to ask voters, you know, who said, I don't think that Massachusetts is going in the right direction, and they asked them why, and their #1 was the legislature.
Yeah, and I think it's very common to give that answer because you're getting
Why do
the
you
same.
think that is?
You're getting the same answer on the national level. I think people associate the state legislature with what's happening on the national level. When you get it force-fed to you every single night, you know, on the 6 o'clock news, so no matter what station you're watching, you see this divide between two camps, the Democrats and the Republicans. The state legislature just doesn't work that way. And I am also amazed at how many people assume that I, as a legislator, go to Washington, D.C. to do my job, and they haven't separated the idea that we do our work in Boston in the state legislature, two very different things. So a lot of people, I think, make that automatic association when, in fact, they're two very, very different things.
We have just under a minute left, and I want to ask you a question I asked your challenger about question 3, the ballot question, that would roll back the law from 2016 that would prohibit discrimination against members of the gay and lesbian community. Where do you stand on that question?
I think that when, you know, the law was passed, I think it has worked well in Massachusetts. I think that it would be a step backwards to reverse what the legislature has acted upon.
You'll vote yes on question 3.
I will vote yes on question 3.